Well, thanks for returning and joining if it's your first time to jump in. So just to recap last week a little bit, we are talking about the book Unstuck by Keith Yamashita and Sandra Spataro. And as you can see, this is my copy here. I have lots of things flagged. This is designed to be an interactive book. It's not really in print right now. I mean, there are a few that you can find out on Amazon. It's not an ebook either. And so that's why I wanted to bring it back to the forefront, because it's one that I thought was really interesting when it was published, I think about 15 years ago. And I was sorry for it to kind of get lost among all of the different books and resources out there. So if you remember last week, if you were here, see if I can get to the next slide. There we go. We talked high level about the perspective in here, and really what they're talking about is learn to fix the system and not the symptom when it comes to getting unstuck. And so the authors put together a framework here that talks about how you get different elements in balance. So at the center, you have your purpose, and then around those, you have strategy, structure and process, metrics and rewards, people and interaction, and culture. And so last week, we talked about what happens when some of these things get out of whack. Like we looked at this one, which was all heart, no action. This is kind of the typical, nonprofit or founder's problem when you have a great purpose, but you don't have any of the structures or anything around it to make it happen. And another one that was along those lines was all brains or no brawn. So you've got it all figured out, but you just don't have anybody to execute it for you. So I picked these two out of a few. There were probably 7 examples of being kind of out of whack. I picked these two because they directly relate to the things that we're talking about today when we start to diagnose why people are stuck. So that's what we're going to start doing today. And in this book, they talk about the serious 7. So these are symptoms where I think we all agreed last week, with COVID, we pretty much feel them all. Now, in this context, we're talking about how you feel at work, in your organization, or the volunteer efforts that you're a part of, anywhere where you're trying to make progress, not necessarily on a personal front. So this week, we're going to talk about being overwhelmed or exhausted in that setting. Next week, we'll talk about directionless, hopeless, and battle-torn. And then the following week, when we wrap up, we'll talk about worthless and alone. So this sounds like a big cause for drinking. And should you desire to have a lunchtime cocktail, I'm not opposed, but I'll refrain so that I don't turn out to be a blubbering idiot as we go along. So the first one we're going to talk about is being overwhelmed. And I think we can all relate to this at some point at work where either there's too much to do, or in this context, this is about being stuck and feeling overwhelmed because you just don't know what to do next. There's a goal that you have to reach, and it's just really difficult to sort out what to do next. It might be that, you used to know what to do next, and suddenly it just feels impossible to know. And it just all seems like too much work, and you just want to go take a nap. So here were some of the telltale signs that the authors talked about. Procrastination. If you are seeing procrastination, or you're feeling like you're procrastinating a lot more than normal, which was the case of me earlier this week as I was preparing for this presentation. Fortunately, I had a deadline, which is one of the remedies we're going to see here in a second. But here, when you're feeling overwhelmed and you're procrastinating a lot, it's about not being able to figure out why you just can't get started. I mean, it just feels like you want to sit on the couch and watch Netflix. But, if you don't take care of it, basically your team's going to sit there and not be doing the things it needs to be doing to get you moved ahead. And, as an organization leader, I certainly fall into this trap of procrastinating myself into a problem. So some of these things on the right, might sound familiar. We know what to do, but we just don't know how we're going to get it all done. Or does it look like the boss is a deer in the headlights? Failure might not be an option, but it doesn't look like success is either. So these are the kinds of things that you might be hearing if you are experiencing being stuck from being overwhelmed in your organization. So when we look at this structure, the thing that is missing typically is structure and process. So we don't have a path charted and responsibilities and all these kinds of work to actually get done. It's like eating an elephant, but not knowing where to start. So in the book, like I said, I have lots of things marked. The way this book works is they lay out these options, and then they have lots of different, it's almost like choose your own adventure. They say, oh, if you're overwhelmed, go check out page 75 or check out page 139, because ultimately a lot of these symptoms overlap in terms of what you can do about them. So the first thing, and it seems pretty obvious, it is just not very easy to implement, is to minimize process loss. So when you think about productivity of a group, whether it's a volunteer group that you're part of or at work, productivity equals your potential productivity minus process loss plus gains from working together. And if you think about even just going to a meeting, I think about our church council and how unproductive we are because we don't necessarily, I mean, we have a process, but the process isn't worked out very well because we're without a pastor right now. So that's where we are not being very productive because we're kind of overwhelmed with having to deal with the whole situation. So you have process loss, and then you have gains from working together, which is the synergy factor. But today I wanted to focus on where the real problem is minimizing process loss. So the authors say that there are three things to focus on. One of them is coordinating activity, then clarifying roles, and then ensuring efficient handoffs. So if you think about in your own workplace or in any volunteer organizations that you're in, just the coordination of stuff and who's doing what and making sure that the next thing actually starts happening takes a lot of effort, and it can be really paralyzing. So the first thing is determining what the process will be. I had someone contact me recently about this coaching program that we're putting together. And this is somebody who was a client in the past. And he said, you know, the reason that I'm calling you is not because I haven't done this before. It's because I just don't have a process committed to mind. And I know I'm going to get a shortcut here if we use your process and go for it. So I thought I'd show you kind of, you know, when it comes to making a strategic marketing plan or communications plan, and some of you have been through this with me actually, we have now divided it out into 9 steps with 3 phases, and each step has a very specific set of things that we do. So we break what seems to be an elephant down into smaller parts that have a set of instructions. So you, as the person trying to get ultimately a marketing plan, don't have to think so hard about how to go about it. You can just say, okay, I'm going to do step 1, then step 2, then step 3, then step 4, and so on and so on. So this is how we help give people a process so they don't have to think so hard. So the second thing is to determine roles. And when it comes to, you know, thinking about, do you have the right people on the bus and what people do you put in each seat? You know, that's not a simple task, especially when you're a leader who is feeling overwhelmed in the first place. You know, one of the best decisions I ever made was to hire Erin Swear. It was important that I hired everybody else also, but she is the one who keeps us together. And in my executive coaching group, we talk a lot about, you know, find a virtual assistant or find some sort of assistant. You know, that's what my executive coach really talks about. It's like, get the things off of your plate that somebody else is really good at coordinating, because a lot of organizational leaders aren't actually very good at all of the details because they're more visionary. So to me, that was really pivotal in my business, was to have somebody who's in charge of making sure stuff happens, who is not me. Coordination tools. So when we think about coordinating work, that takes a lot of time. I mean, thank goodness we have an Erin. The rest of us on the team say that every day, to coordinate what's going on. And we have tried a lot of project management tools over the years, and I thought I'd share with you kind of where we are right now. We are just now implementing ClickUp. So ClickUp is pretty flexible. It can be, you know, it can manage any sort of project. You can put in all kinds of documents and notes. The executive coach I work with, they really like Notion. It is very similar in nature. It might be a little bit more, it has more things in terms of like keeping notes or assigning, you know, keeping information together rather than mapping out a project. In the past, we've used teamwork.com. Erin's been exploring all of these, and she's just really liking ClickUp right now. So I'm curious, stick in the chat, what productivity tools do you use? Do you use, you know, Excel or Google Sheets, or do you have other types of tools that help keep your groups and teams on track? we find them that it takes a lot of time to manage until you have everybody fully committed to using them. It's tricky, but so far we're really liking ClickUp. Another one for coordination that we happen to be using is what we call SharpSpring. So many of you are probably using MailChimp or Constant Contact or other kinds of tools that help you manage contacts and then communicate with them. And that is a huge time saver compared to having your contact information in an Excel sheet and trying to use Outlook or Gmail to contact people. So we have found this to be a real game changer. SharpSpring is probably on the, it's more robust than like a MailChimp or a Constant Contact, because you can also, here, this is just one of their slides that has a demonstration of their sales funnel. So you can keep track of where your contacts are in the process of what you want them to do. Plus you can do all the emailing, and you can do landing pages and automated emails. You can set up these really elaborate sequences of emails, and if they do this, then this. So we think it is robust enough. There are lots of other tools out there that are much more expensive and crazy, but this one has been working for us and a lot of our clients. So then the last thing that we've done, even more recently in the past few months, as we have grown our team, is scheduled check-ins with individuals and the team more regularly. So we have Aaron checking in with people 15 minutes every week, and then we have a weekly status meeting. So just the idea of making our meetings more efficient and checking in with people on a regular basis is making us more efficient. One tool we really like, if you're on Microsoft, we love Microsoft Teams. So we were Skype users before, but on Teams, we happen to like this view where, you can see everybody at once in what they call, oh gosh, I can't remember. It's not gallery view. It's the other one. Together mode. Sorry, the together mode. So we really like Teams. The thing that we've been exploring a lot more is using channels. So they have a place where you can keep your notes. You can have clients coming in on different things. So this has been a really great tool for us to use too. So anybody else with productivity tools? I know, Sandra, you're using SharpSpring that we helped you with. Anyone else using a project management tool? I know there's one called Monday, there's Asana, other kinds of project management stuff. There may be some that if you're a realtor or other, in certain professions, they have certain profession specific ones. If any of you are thinking about using one, definitely talk to Erin. She has explored, and I can connect you. She can give you some reviews. Okay, so that was idea number one. That's a big one, trying to get a handle on minimizing process loss. So the next thing is to set a public deadline, which is like today. I would never present to you unless we made it public like this. I didn't have my presentation done when we planned this. So to set a public deadline for something, and I'm looking at Donna right here, and it's like, okay, if we're going to have a cocktail fundraiser, let's put it on the calendar and tell the world. And guess what? It's going to get done, because it's going to be embarrassing if we don't. So, when it comes to getting people moving, there's nothing better than a deadline to get that to happen. Idea number 3, now in this book, they have about 15 ideas related to this particular symptom. These were the ones that I just thought really spoke to me, and I thought they might speak to you. Idea number 3 is deliver the tough message. Is there something going on that just needs to be dealt with? Or is there a rift, or is there a performance issue to deal with? And, I've had to fire a few people in my life. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. But I've always been sorry that I didn't do it sooner. And the people on my team have been sorry that I didn't do it sooner, when it comes to a performance kind of issue. So I think just, digging in is always the best policy in a, of course, a constructive way. And then idea number 4, in terms of getting out of being overwhelmed, is to decide. I think it's so easy to put off decisions, especially when you're feeling really overwhelmed. It's easy to say, I just can't think about that right now. I'm going to decide tomorrow. And then suddenly that becomes next week, and it becomes next month, and then it becomes next year. And you've made no decision about how to move forward. And so a decision today is often worth twice as much as a decision tomorrow. So it's a problem if you don't make decisions. So I think this is really valuable advice. Okay, so those are 4 tips for dealing with being overwhelmed. Did any of those 4 speak to your particular situation? If so, drop it in the chat. I'm curious to hear where you feel like your organization is feeling overwhelmed and what kinds of things you're thinking about applying there. Okay, so the next one is exhausted. Overwhelmed and exhausted tend to go together in my experience. And certainly I feel like January is like, at the end of January, it's like the coldest week of the year usually. And it's just like, you know, the Christmas glow is worn off and we're tired again. When it comes to feeling exhausted as an organization, it usually comes from being through a rough patch and you just need to reset. It's almost like you've lost your North Star. And things just become ugly. So we actually looked at this last week. This was the where you're just completely off kilter. So usually it comes from concentrating on the individual parts of the system, but not thinking about everything coming together. So the authors have a few ideas on how to deal with getting over being exhausted. The first one, and this is a little bit 2 parts, is just to reinvigorate people by reminding them what the vision is. You know, why are we doing this? This is important work and it is worth our effort, and we are important in getting it done. So it's painting a picture of the vision and reminding people of that. So that's kind of like 1A. 1B, they call it Let Your Soul Be Your Guide. And this is about culture. So here they're defining culture. It's the way people behave and get things done in an organization without being told. These are the unwritten rules of behavior. So, you know, if you think about a culture, like when you go to visit France or any other country, you know, some things are acceptable and some things aren't, and you just don't know what those are unless you've read the guidebook or you suddenly make a faux pas of some sort. So with culture, their advice is things can easily get done for no good reason. People can start drinking their coffee black at 10 a.m. for no good reason, and suddenly that becomes coffee break for 30 minutes for everybody every day. And that may or may not be a good practice. I happen to think it's fine. But these small things can become religion really, really quickly. And so when you have to be really intentional about shaping your culture. And we've been working on this with Idea Tech. They've started to roll some of this out as they've hired a lot more people. And I thought I'd show you, which is on their website too, some of their intentional pieces about culture. And so the very first thing that we helped them define was just who they are and what do they do. And they had it, we didn't, you know, make up anything, and neither did they. It was always inside them to be these, you know, fighting for internet freedom folks who were there for the little guy or little woman like Lori Bauer, who has bad internet. Or Bailey Stiggins, or any of these folks who are out in the country who simply cannot work. So then we started to break that into pieces. You know, what does that mean for how we're going to operate? When we look for people to hire, what values and mindset do we want them to have from the get-go to know that they're going to be a good fit here, and they're going to know that they're going to do the kinds of things we want them to do without being asked. So for them, their principles are about pushing the limits, building a strong case, acting like an owner, and joining forces. And when they look for people, it's about being passionate, hyper adaptable, tenacious, inventive, and trustworthy. Now, if you were to look at a page like this for something like the Red Cross, or somebody like, let's see, the Kansas Livestock Association, they're all going to look very different because they all have their own personality and the things that they value. And so here, oh, you'd like to see the culture statement? Sure. Culture is the way people behave and get things done in an organization without being told. So to me, this is, in my job, this is one of the most fun things that we get to do, is help people uncover and articulate the kind of unwritten rules that are already there, and then to shape them for the future so that they can really make their lives a lot easier when it comes to hiring and retaining the right people. I was going to show you also, let's go over here for a second. Another thing we did to help them communicate that culture was a book. We call it a culture book. So it's just a 12-page little, 5x7 piece that they gave first to their employees that they currently had, and then now that they've about doubled in size, they give it to their new hires. So this, I'll just flip through it. This talks about, that they have an important job to do. This is their mission. They give some background so that everyone has a common story about where they came from. We talk about who they're targeting and their role as an employee in completing the mission with these folks. They talk about their promise, which is freedom, and what that means for their customers, their employees, and their community. And then the freedom fighter characteristics that we just saw. And then, how we succeed. A lot of times telling people what success is and what it isn't is a good way for people to understand the difference. And then we have them sign it. So that's one local example of how you can shape the culture proactively by defining it and being really intentional about it. Okay, number 2. Okay, all of you who were group project leaders in college and did the whole thing yourself. Okay, raise your hand. How many of you always got stuck with all of the work? My 4th grader is already complaining about it because she's a little type A, perfectionist. But here the key is to know if you really need a team. And, it's been the rage, teamwork, teamwork, teamwork. But in reality, it can be really costly and difficult and really, really frustrating. So they say, if you're feeling exhausted, it can a lot of times be because you are trying to do something that doesn't need to be done in a team with a team. So you might need a team if people are dependent on one another for different parts of the end product. Now, that does not mean that they need to be in every meeting together every time. It just means that you have to coordinate your work that way. Or the task can benefit from social interaction. So if you're brainstorming an idea around something or you need to make a decision, certainly having a group of people makes some sense. Or there's a common group goal. And this is a very, wide kind of criteria for needing a team. But if something can be done by an individual and they have the skills for it, let them. That's basically their idea. So then the part, this is kind of 2A. So balanced team and individual incentives. So you can run into being exhausted when the incentives are out of balance. And incentives can be anything, the obvious things like money, but other things like, having time off or having the ability to be leading something. But effective teams are motivated when you have the right balance of team incentives and individual incentives. And when they get out of whack, it can make people really, really mad. All right. So number 3, and this is the last one on this topic for today, is deal with politics. Oh gosh, we all love politics and they're exhausting. This kind of goes back to, like the principle on being overwhelmed of like, okay, deal with the problem. But here they get into, before you can deal with politics, you have to figure out what the basis of conflict is. And they talk about 2 different ones. There's relational, where people are just having a disagreement on a personal level. It's about ego or hidden agendas. And then there is the kind of easier one sometimes to identify the task-based conflict, which is about what work must be done or how to do it. Now, that is something that can come into play in a team when you don't need a team. So some of these things kind of go together. So those are the tips for today. We have a lot to cover next week. The tips that they have for each one of these symptoms are extensive, and I've just pulled out a few that I thought were particularly interesting. The good news is some overlap. So as we go through the weeks, we can draw on what we've already learned.